big ship and true as a bung to bit should when the gales of November gave her lay.
Now, live from the middle of the Detroit River, here are your hosts, Channel 4's own favorite dive team, Mal Sillers and Mike Wendland.
Good evening to you. I'm Mal Sillers.
And I'm Mike Wendland, and we are coming to you live from the middle of the Detroit River in a night that promises to give all of us a real major adventure.
It is going to be an adventure. It's going to be exciting because right down below us, the anchor from the Edmund Fitzgerald, it's been there for 18 years, and during this next hour, we're going to be bringing it up live.
And the fact that so many are watching us both at home, on television, and all around us tonight on the river shows how Detroiters have had a long-term love affair with the river, the Great Lakes, and all that goes with our history here.
I'm pretty excited about it because in just a few minutes, I'm going to be headed on down and help hook up the anchor, and we'll get it up here.
Well, what I'd like to know is how a mild-mannered meteorologist happens to be the leader of our dive team. Now, how'd you get involved in all this?
Well, I've been involved with the Dawson dive team for about 5 years now. We brought up the Cannons in '87 and the Rum Runner last year, and there's just a whole lot of heritage down there, and it's fun to bring it up and make it available for people to see the history of Detroit, which is really scattered about.
Well, one thing that maybe would be fun to do is to set the scene for everybody right now. We are smack dab in the middle of the Detroit River, right over the shipping channel, about halfway between Hart Plaza downtown and Belle Isle. Now, we are going to be covering this event tonight with cameras topside here on the barge, also on our dive boat behind us, from a cement factory across the river, and underwater.
We are. And, of course, none of this would really be taking place if the Edmund Fitzgerald had not become just about the most fabled boat to sail the Great Lakes. For thousands of invited guests, and many who just showed up hoping for a glimpse of maritime history in the making, the launch of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in June of 1958 would turn out to be unforgettable. The scene was Detroit's Great Lake Engineering Works, just downriver from the mouth of the River Rouge. And one of the uninvited who managed to get in was a young college student named Bill Hoey.
I went up onto the roof of the engineering building, which was about 100 feet from the end of the slip, and we had no way to really tell when the ship was going to be launched because the real launching party was taking place at the bow of the ship, probably 800 or 900 feet away from us, and we couldn't hear the speeches and the prayers and christening and so forth that was taking place, so all we could do was stand there and wait.
A year earlier, Bill had visited the shipyard to have a look at the Fitzgerald under construction.
The reason why there was so much interest in the Fitzgerald while it was being built is that it was the largest ship built on the Great Lakes at the time.
The Fitz was also considered by many to be the finest example of the shipbuilder's art.
It was really constructed with the knowledge of 50 years of steel shipbuilding on the Great Lakes. Over the years, naval architects' only way of testing their knowledge and to know that their vessel was strong enough to stand up to the weather on the Great Lakes was to send it out there and see that it came back. And if there were any weaknesses in it, if anything happened over the years of service, the architects would put more steel into the ship. They redesigned things to put more steel, more steel. To get the ship up onto the rails to launch her off of, they drive large wooden wedges with sledgehammers between the blocks to actually lift the whole ship up. And it takes hundreds of men to do that. The ship, literally, this huge 730-foot ship had to be bodily picked up with simple wood wedges to be launched.
Finally, the lines were cut and the Fitz slid into a basin barely large enough to hold her. A flawless launch, except for some of the spectators standing a little too close.
There was probably 300 people standing between the building and the end of the slip who suddenly realized that all that water was displaced out of the slip, and it was about a foot deep all around them.
In addition to the wet feet, there was one report of a Toledo man who died of a heart attack at the scene. And some would recall the sailors' ancient superstition that any unfortunate occurrence during a boat's launch was always a bad omen.
Unforgettable, that's what you are.
So the Edmund Fitzgerald took its place on the lakes, joining a large fleet of hard-working ore carriers and freighters that helped to fuel and maintain the industry and economy of an entire region. Like the other vessels, she did her job quietly. Like the others, she moved her cargo up and down the lakes and picked her mail and laundry up at the Westcott in the Detroit River. Yet there was always something special about the Fitz that made her the favorite of buffs and shore watchers and the pride of her crew.
She's a new type and a new design. She was the flagship of her fleet, the Columbia Transportation. She's a trendsetter. She was the largest one on the lakes from 1958 to 1971. She also set cargo records. You're talking about, you know, millions of tons of iron ore being moved on the Great Lakes, and she did it.
That was Columbia's flagship, and I was excited about going on there, you know, and she was kept up real well, all the departments. Very clean vessel, operated real well.
Today, Mark Lathrop is chief engineer on the Courtney Burton, and Bob Tilley is her captain. But for a short time in the mid-70s, they were crew members on the Fitzgerald. Mark spent 3 months on board as part of his studies at the Great Lakes Maritime Institute. He left with dishes, glasses, and a Thanksgiving Day menu as mementos from the crew. Bob Tilley worked 60 days of vacation relief as a third mate.
If you was to ask any sailor if they would name 1 or 2 ships that they would rather ride on in a storm, the Fitzgerald's name would always come up because she was well made, you know, and she was a big ship and was noted for riding good seas and all aspects of a storm, you know.
Fascinating piece, Mel. I know there's a lot more to come. The very sad, the tragic end of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We wanted to pause here just for a moment to make sure we understand all that's going on. Lots of activity behind us here, Mel.
There is a lot of activity on the dive boat. The guys are getting ready to go on down. Of course, there's a lot of cables to go down, and we have safety divers that are going to be down there for each of us in the water. So it's a slow process to get everybody prepared, make sure everything is in place, just because it is kind of risky down here in the river. Mike?
Well, Mel, I'm with Deputy Chief James Bannon from the Detroit Police Department. As you mentioned, there's a lot of safety divers here. And, Chief, first of all, we want to just thank you for providing all of this safety. It's a very dangerous river to dive.
It's one of the more dangerous in the country. As a matter of fact, that's why diving in the river and swimming in the river is proscribed by law. So for every diver that goes down, a working diver, there's a safety diver in attendance, and they work a buddy system. Just
a few moments ago, one of the safety divers was checking the current, and we noticed he let go of his line, and he was down 100 or so yards. It's a tremendous current, and I think we need to stress how this is not for every sport diver.
Well, if you recall, I think day after tomorrow they're having a picnic in honor of Richard Fortin, who was lost in this river during the Grand Prix about 3 or 4 years ago. And that was due to the current and the fact that he lost his safety equipment and he perished in this river.
Well, Chief, we want to thank you very much for your cooperation and particularly for the protection that all these divers offer. Should be an interesting night. Back to you, Mal.
Thanks, Mike. Let's now go back and see the rest of the story of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
I, of course, saw it many, many times afloat, and I took many pictures of it as it went up and down the river here wherever I saw it.
Bill Hoey ended up working the past 31 years on the river. He owns the Gaelic Tugboat Company and the river's popular tour boat, the Diamond Jack.
And in fact, I took a picture of it the last cargo it unloaded there. It may well be the last photograph taken of the Edmund Fitzgerald unloading her cargo of Great Lakes steel just the week before she disappeared.
The legend lives on from the Chippewa down up a big lake they call Gitchagumi. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy.
A quiet sunset on Lake Superior can be lovely. But the lake the Chippewas call Gitchagumi can also be treacherous and unforgiving. Both huge and enormously deep, Superior is so cold, 40 degrees in summer or winter, that it lacks the organisms that infest drowned bodies in milder waters and bring them to the surface. And of course, her November storms have always been legendary. Just how bad can the Great Lakes storms get? Some say worse than ocean storms. This is home videotape shot by Bill Hoey on the William Clay Ford during high winds and heavy seas on Lake Huron. And these rare photos of an embattled freighter reinforce the findings of a scientific study conducted during a storm in November 1966 that sank the Daniel J. Morrell. Strain gauges installed on a freighter that survived recorded a stress of 23,000 pounds per square inch, much higher than ever recorded on any ocean vessel. In rough weather, they say when you walk a freighter's tunnels running just below deck, you can actually see her twist and bend. It was a stormy mid-afternoon, November 9th, 1975, in the middle of Superior when word first came that the Edmund Fitzgerald might be in trouble. She was downbound, filled with ore, when Captain Ernest McSorley radioed the Arthur Anderson, following her down the lake, that she was taking on water. McSorley didn't seem concerned and stayed in touch with the Anderson for the next 4 hours as the two ships plowed through the hurricane winds, blinding snow and 30-foot waves. Finally, at 7:25 p.m., the Anderson's radar lost the track of the Fitz. And Captain Don Erickson on the William Clay Ford, sheltered from the storm behind Whitefish Point, got a call from his old friend, the Anderson skipper.
Bernie Cooper on Anderson called me up, because we all know each other out there, and asked me if I'd seen him come around the point, because he wasn't exactly sure how far he was ahead of him. And I says, no, nothing's coming around a point.
Soon the Coast Guard put out a call for ships in the area to go out and search for the Fitzgerald.
We had about 8 or 10 ships anchored in the bay. We were talking, Anderson says, well, he might go back out there, and so I'm thinking, well, if my son was on that ship, which I knew a lot of people on that ship, if my son was on that ship, I sure want some of my friends to come out and look for my son. So I asked the rest of the guys, say, you want to go out there? Do you think we should go out there? And every one of them says, well, whatever I wanted to do, they would do. So I says, well, get her underway. We'll get the engine ready. We'll go out and we'll take a look.
The Anderson and the William Clay Ford were joined by the Hilda Marjan, a Canadian vessel.
We got around the point. It was rolling pretty good at that time. And then the Hilda Marjan decided he couldn't take that rolling. So he turned around and went right back under the point again and anchored. And the Anderson and us went on up.
The two boats, along with the Coast Guard planes and helicopters, searched through the night. But the Fitzgerald had gone down about 13 miles and less than an hour from the safety of Whitefish Point.
And we were off the Keweenaw. And,
Bob Tilley was third mate that night on the Armco on Superior's western end.
Always, and the Coast Guard came on and made an announcement that there was a ship sinking, you know, in the east end of Lake Superior. And then on the second one, they named the ship as the Fitzgerald. So me and the wheelsman both, we just couldn't believe this, you know.
I had a radio by the bed there. And
Mark Lathrop was home on vacation in Trenton.
I think a WJR broadcast or something. And he signed off saying, that's all we have now on the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And when he mentioned the vessel, I just refused to believe it.
Bob Tilley on the Armco reached the scene the next morning.
The whole crew was in total shock, you know. And when you see all these things floating, and we were picking it up, and there was lots of flotsam in the water. There was oars and life jackets and all different things like this. We picked up everything we could and put it on the deck. And we were actually looking for some survivors sooner or later, you know. That was the thing, you know. You could find parts of the vessel, but you couldn't find anybody else, you know. And that's the thing that shocked everybody. And we spent 6 to 8 hours there that day just searching and searching.
It was as if a monstrous sea had grabbed the Fitzgerald in its teeth, snapped her in two, and swallowed her forever, along with all of her 29 men. None of their bodies has ever been found, but sailors have been debating ever since exactly what happened to her.
They work so much in the storm, you know, that it only flexed so many times. And I believe that she broke right in two and went down, and it didn't take quite long to do that either.
I think she hit a reef north of Caribou, so that's my theory. And it put a hole in her, and then she finally broke in half.
Captain Erickson agrees with Captain Tilley that the Fitzgerald probably hit a shoal or a reef off Caribou Island and began taking on water. But he points out that we'll never really know.
It could have been something that happened to the ship before, and he didn't even come close to the shoal. Maybe he had some kind of structural damage in it that they didn't even know anything about.
Today, as we can see in this display at the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, the Fitzgerald lies in two pieces on the bottom of Lake Superior in more than 500 feet of water.
In a musty old hull in Detroit, they prayed in a maritime sailor Paul's Cathedral. The church bell chimed till the ranks 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald.
After they get 29 people ring the bell, and when each name is read, and then the 29 people stand there as a group, you look at it and say, here's the crew on the Fitzgerald. That's how many guys was lost on that ship. And it's pretty impressive. And you look there and think, that's our 29 people.
A sad, sad story, Mal, and one we've certainly seen repeated in our history with the Great Lakes.
That's really true. Of course, the Fitz went down November of 1975, and she was the last of the big vessels to go down in the lakes to this day.
And a famous one it was. Well, coming up, preparations continue for our live dive. Mal has his wetsuit on. Coming up in just a minute, we'll tell you how the Fitzgerald lost its anchor and how it was found. Stay with us, everybody.
Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn in minutes?
Hi, welcome back. Preparations now well underway for our recovery of the anchor of the famous Edmund Fitzgerald here in the middle of the Detroit River. Just behind me here on our dive boat, the Grosse Ile, you can see a whole throng of divers and recovery members getting ready to go down. Mal Sillers, my colleague, is down there getting ready himself. Mal, you got a lot of people around you there.
I really do. We have a lot of people all around tonight. Matter of fact, a lot of folks out on the river. A lot of pleasure boats out there tonight. In fact, one big one, the Diamond Jack, that owned by Gaelic Tugboat Company. People on that boat paid $100 tonight to take that ride, have some food, a cruise on the river, and come see the anchor raised. And of course, a lot of that goes to Dawson Museum to help the entire cause. In fact, a couple gentlemen there from Trenton Rotary have a check, we understand, for $500 for the underwater research team. All of that to help take care of, raise, and move the anchor from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Let's see how it was lost and found.
When freighters drop anchor, it is usually to wait their turn at the locks or a dock, or because it's a little too risky to keep moving. This one, close to the size of the Edmund Fitzgerald, is stopping because of fog. Of course, it takes an anchor of great weight and a chain of great strength to hold the huge ship. But once it is safe to move again, the winch usually hauls up the anchor without delay. Usually, but not always. Ice in the Detroit River, not uncommon here in January, and 1974 was no exception. The lighted marker buoys had been pulled from the river, and the Edmund Fitzgerald, on its last trip of the season, was downbound for Toledo. Rather than risk moving on the river at night, the captain put her to anchor about halfway between Belle Isle and downtown. But the next morning, when the Fitz prepared to move on, the chain parted and the anchor stayed. The story of how the anchor was found nearly 2 decades later by the Dawson Museum's dive team begins with a case of mistaken identity.
We found an anchor on the opposite side of Belle Isle back in the late 70s, and we were doing some research on it, and we ran across an article in Telescope magazine that says that the Fitzgerald had lost an anchor. So we just assumed that that was the Fitzgerald anchor. And after we completed last year's project, we were looking for another one, and we thought that the Fitzgerald would be a nice project to do with raising the anchor that they had lost.
A little more digging turned up the fact that a commercial diver named Wayne Brusate had actually been assigned to find the anchor the day after it had been lost back in January 1974.
It was a cold day. I remember being a lot of wind and snow and quite a bit of ice coming down the river. But it was important to the Fitzgerald to attempt to recover the anchor as soon as they could, as they were getting ready to sail again. So we anchored the tug in the approximate location that the captain had indicated on the chart, and I went down the anchor chain of the tug.
After a half hour of searching, Wayne was signaled back up because the ice on the river was getting too dangerous.
I had to wait underneath the tugboat for about 10 minutes before the ice would clear enough to allow me to get back out of the water.
Once I got back on the deck of the tug, we all decided it would be much safer to wait for a better day.
For Wayne, that day never came, but he always kept that chart with the captain's coordinates.
Once we received their coordinates, we realized that the anchor was actually lost in the anchorage on the opposite side of the island where we found the original one. And then the search began from there.
We're looking at a particular location, which is in essence about 8 football fields long and wide, and you're dealing with something that is on the bottom of the river where visibility may be between 6 inches or 8 feet. It depends on the day. We first started out looking in April, and it ended up being that the river was basically too dirty at that point in time. The visibility was not there.
On Sunday, May 17th, with the dive team recording their efforts on home video, they headed back to the river. Yes, that's Captain Don Erickson at the wheel, and backed by Bill Hoey. The dive boat Grosse Ile carried a lot of equipment, but none more important than this magnetometer, which located several large metal objects down below.
It ought to be coming. It's coming up. It's coming to flow. 2 hours or 2 hours? 82. There it was. Okay, now we passed over.
The team made several dives on a number of objects, most of them huge metal pipes. And finally, dive master Nick Martinez, who had started the search years before, had some luck.
We made the last dive that day on the last target for that day, and we had ran right into it.
A few days later, the team returned to the location, this time with underwater cameras to bring back the first pictures from the bottom. Other than its coating of zebra mussels and some curious fish, the divers were the anchor's first visitors in nearly 2 decades. And in addition to their pictures, the team brought back an important piece of evidence: the broken key link in the anchor chain, marked with a date in the shipyard where the Fitz was built.
So we have the anchor and a particular shackle which is there, which is the link in the chain as it was, the master link, which is used to hold the anchor to the chain. Both of those were found within 30 feet of each other, so we have a real good proof that that's the Fitzgerald's anchor.
Back live once again here on the dive boat in the middle of the Detroit River. You can see now our first divers beginning to go in. These are safety divers. In the water right now, that's Jerry Clift. He's a sergeant with the Detroit Police Underwater Recovery Team. And going in right next to him is John Gatz. John is another one of our volunteers. Everyone here is a volunteer tonight. John's a middle school principal in Madison Heights. The dive team is very busy. Preparations getting underway. Mal Sillers is down there with the gentlemen who have been taking those spectacular underwater pictures that you've been seeing. Mal, are these guys pros?
You'd think they were, wouldn't you, Mike? But they are not. They're amateur photographers. Frank Savarino, owner of Phil's Meat Market up in Warren. You've been taking pictures for a long time?
Yeah, underwater videograph has been a hobby of mine for quite some time. What we have is a high-heat camera and a cast aluminum housing, and special connectors to the surface, which allows us to bring up the video signal.
All right, we can show them if I can just reach down here. It's just a regular little handy cam that you can buy at your favorite appliance store, and the housing costs what, twice as much as the camera?
Yeah, about 1.5 times.
Just about 1.5 times. Dave Mabry, also a photographer, and he's running the other camera. Dave, you work with microcomputers up at Chrysler.
Yeah, that's right. I've been working with microcomputers for probably 17 years now at Chrysler Corp.
Those are the guys that are going to be down at the bottom taking the pictures. They'll be going down in just a minute, and pretty soon you'll be watching live from the bottom of the Detroit River. Mike?
Okay, Mal, as you can see, a whole assortment of volunteers, school principals, police officers, a meat cutter, everyone very excited now as it gets very close to the time that we're going to be going back down. We're going to take a slight break right now, and then when we return, we're going to show you another fascinating part of this, how we're able to talk to you from down 38 feet in the Detroit River. Stay with us. We will be right back. Hi again, everyone. Welcome back to the middle of the Detroit River. We are standing by, getting ready now to go down 38 feet for the recovery of the anchor from the Edmund Fitzgerald. If you look behind me on the barge, more divers going in. You just saw Mal talking to Frank and to Dave, our underwater cameraman. They are now heading in. You can see the underwater camera with its housing being hooked up. They are about to head in. My partner, Mal Sillers, is down there. He is also getting ready to dive. Mal, how's it coming? How long before we are in touch with that anchor?
We're going to be down there in just a little bit, Mike. The cameramen are just in the water. I would like to say, though, that, you know, the dive teams around the area have given us great support. I don't know that we can get a shot of Diamond Jack, but there are some support dive shops around here that have really helped us. U.S. Scuba, Advanced Aquatics, Bruno's, Tom and Jerry's have all helped with this project, and we thank them for that. Mike?
All right. Well, you know, while you're talking about it, it's an amazing thing, Mal, how scuba diving has just picked up in popularity here in the Great Lakes over the past couple of years. I want to thank you particularly, Mal, because you're the one who got me into just in this incredible sport. Scuba diving now is catching on. It is a popular sport. Most of these dive shops all offering it in their individual communities. Lots of them taught through the community education programs. So lots of folks may want to check it out after this. You hear the splashes of more divers going in water. That's our second camera coming in. Mal, how about you? Are you getting ready yourself to go in? I see you're quietly getting left alone up there on the deck.
I'm going to be going in just a minute. The divers have just gone. I'm going to suit up, and while I do that, let me show you this picture or tape on how we talk to you from underwater.
I think it's going to work out all right. It sounds pretty good up here. We're not getting any interference.
No, I don't notice it at all. That's great.
This is something new to me. No, not being at the bottom of the river and not having my picture taken while I'm down there. Those things aren't new at all. But being able to talk directly to other members of our dive team, both down below and up on the surface, that's something new. And the fact that I'm also able to talk to you from the river bottom is, of course, an added bonus.
Hi, I'm Mal Sillers here on the bottom of the Detroit River. Join me live as we raise the legendary Edmund Fitzgerald's anchor live tonight on Channel 4.
The communications masks we're using were developed for commercial diving and are often used in search and recovery operations. Normally, they're not used in sport diving, so they were entirely new to most of us on the Dawson Museum's volunteer dive team. But the Detroit Police Underwater Recovery Unit has been using them for about 6 months. And Sergeant Jerry Cliff, who heads the police dive team, wanted us to use them because diving in the river can be hazardous. For one thing, it's not easy to see down there.
We get anywhere from 6 to 8 foot visibility on a good day. Boat traffic makes it hazardous, heavily traveled waterway. The obstructions underwater that are potentially there, things have been dumped in the river for hundreds of years. There are boulders down there the size of a car. If you're not aware of what you're doing in a current situation, diving in a current, you could easily get swept into something like that, get disabled, and you know, the worst could happen. You could drown.
With that pleasant thought in mind, and knowing the ability to communicate makes diving safer for everyone, we listened closely to Jerry at a recent training session.
Here we're going to go through what we went through the last time. We're going to go through taking the mask off and putting it back on. We're going to go through switching over to the spare air source. We're going to go through adjustments so that you guys can put them on, adjust them without having to worry about it. It's going to come second nature to you by the time we're in the river on the 20th.
So exactly how does this new equipment differ from the conventional mask and mouthpiece? We asked Jerry to demonstrate.
What it does is it's a whole full face mask with communications built in. This is the regulator. Basically does the same thing as this, but inside there's no mouthpiece. There's a full face mask, almost like in a jet pilot's helmet. Back here, we've got earphones built into the mask. Okay, there are earphones inside these rubber housings. This plugs into a hard wire, which runs to the surface, plugs in right here, like this, it screws down, and it puts the diver in communication with the surface base station, We're getting a little feedback with the surface base station as well as with his other dive partner.
Now it was really time to test out the equipment. There were a few flubs and hitches.
You can't turn that one on. You can't turn those on until they're attached.
But once into the mask, we quickly began the process of adjustment. Actually, having no mouthpiece and just breathing inside the mask took some getting used to. And the glass in the mask is farther away from the face, so you actually see the inside of the mask, and it cuts down on your peripheral vision. With some divers, it also produces a claustrophobic effect. With some divers, just being in the river with this limited visibility causes them to feel claustrophobic. Fortunately, I haven't had a problem in either case, and we found the ability to communicate a wonderful advantage.
Okay, what's it like now? Does it sound any good? Nick, what's it sound like now?
I can hear you pretty good. If you want to go a little bit higher, you're still all right.
Okay, so how about now?
No, it's comfortable there.
Okay, very good.
We swam laps to get used to exerting ourselves in the equipment. And finally, we went to the bottom of the pool, taking off the mask, then putting it back on and clearing it to breathe again. Really, it wasn't too much different from similar exercises I've done in the past. But of course, if you had to do it in the river for some reason, there'd be more of a challenge. Unlike diving with conventional equipment, there's no separate mouthpiece to breathe with while clearing the mask.
Ready? Yep.
That's good. Okay, thanks.
No problem.
After our pool sessions, it was time to take the equipment into the river to adjust to using it in that very different environment. With a stiff current of 5 or 6 knots, you quickly feel fatigue as you fight that current. And of course, you're dealing with a depth of 30 or 40 feet with very little visibility. At first, we were all a little apprehensive, but the adjustment came quickly.
Nick, how's the tension on your communication line?
It looks all right.
And on our most recent dive to the anchor 1 week ago, I think we all felt pretty comfortable in our new gear.
Am I rolling up there?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm going to do a take now.
None of us, though, ever forget the advice we get from Jerry Cliff.
You have to learn to keep your head about you and to think under pressure. There are going to be times down there when you know you have about as long as you can hold your breath to make the right decision. And if you don't make the right decision, you don't get a second chance. You have to know what to do in any given situation. You have to be able to handle the equipment from memory. It has to come second nature. If you're not that familiar with it, you're posing hazard to yourself, and that's why all the training here.
Now, all that was taped. This is live. And behind me on the dive deck of our dive boat, the Grosse Ile, my partner Mal Sillers. Mal is now going in. He is hooked up. He's in the water. Mal, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mike.
Well, why don't you tell us, we can see the camera is on you. Tell us a little bit about visibility, what are conditions, and how do you make your way through that dangerous current to the anchor itself?
I have a line right here in my hand. It is tied from the boat to the anchor, and I'm slowly going to go down. The current is very strong tonight.
You can see you're actually swinging away, Mal, as you go down there.
Hang on just a minute, and I'll clear.
Mal is equalizing. Basically, the force, the pressure of the underwater causes a severe pain in your ear if you don't clear or equalize. He is, I think, doing that as we speak. We'll give him a chance to recover. Mal, the visibility doesn't look that bad. After all we've heard about limited visibility here, we can still see you quite clearly.
Yeah, it's really not that bad. It's probably 4 or 5 feet. And even further away than that, you could see a shadow. Getting down there, I can see the light from the bottom camera.
All right, Mal, we know you got a lot of work you have to do as soon as you get there, so this is a great time for us to take a break. And when we come back, it'll be time to put the hook on the anchor of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Stay with us. Be careful now. River, where we are about to recover for you, hopefully live on primetime television, the legendary Edmund Fitzgerald's anchor. Behind me, our dive master, Nick Martinez, about to go into the water. You see him reaching now over for the hook. This is the hook attached to our crane, which will lift the anchor. Now, Nick is also wearing that special underwater camera, or that underwater communications gear that Mal has, and Nick will be in contact with Mal in just a moment. I think, Nick, can you hear me, Nick?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, Nick is now taking that line over to the drop line that we have to the anchor. Mal Sillers is down there 38 feet below. Mal, do you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Mike.
All right, Mal, I'm going to turn it over to you and Nick. Nick is in the water. He is in the water. Go for it, guys.
Okay, we're watching for Nick. We've got a camera aimed up at that direction, and I can tell he's on the way down because the shackle, a huge shackle on this big anchor, is bouncing around, which is a good indication he's on the way down. Once he gets here, we'll take a piece of cable and run it through the shackle, secure it to the crane hook, and then we'll bring it on up. Nick ought to be getting here pretty quick now, although I don't see him.
Have them start lowering the cable more.
Can you hear me, Nick?
Yeah, Mal.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. We're just coming down the line here. They're starting to give me some slack.
I can see you now. Okay. Okay, here we are. Good. Now we're kicking up some dust, so visibility's dropped off a good bit. In fact, this is often what it's like when we're down here. Visibility way, way down. Want me to take that?
Yeah, Mal, could you hold this pin?
Got it.
And here's the shackle. I'm going to feed the eye through it.
You get it? Good?
Yep.
Okay, watch the lines. We've got Spaghetti Junction down here with TV cables and everything else.
Okay, I'll take the shackle.
There you go.
Okay, you got that pin, Mal? Let me slide it in there.
All right, Mal Sillers, I don't know if you can hear me down there, but we see that you guys have your hands filled. This might be a very good time for us to show everyone what is at stake here and why this is such an important job. Why projects like this anchor recovery are so important to Detroit and especially a very special museum. That smart little passenger craft you may have seen chugging up and down the Detroit River lately is a tour boat called the Diamond Jack. In her way, she's our newest institution devoted to maritime history. And every time she rounds Belle Isle, her narrator points out our most established institution devoted to maritime history.
The blue building we're coming upon on our right is the Dawson Great Lakes Museum, a gift from the Dawson family whose funds were matched by the city of Detroit. The museum opened in 1960. The hydroplane Miss Pepsi is on display here. The museum has one of the largest collection of scale models of Great Lakes ships, ship memorabilia, and special exhibits. The white pilot house on the right is from the steamship William Clay Ford.
The pilot house from the William Clay is the most recent major addition to the Dawson's remarkable treasure trove of marine artifacts. Reassembled here when the old flagship of the Ford fleet was retired, the pilot house is open to the public. Visitors can step up to the wheel, check out all of the navigation lathes, and get a feel for what it's like at the helm of a giant ore carrier. And if they're lucky, they might get a glimpse of the William Clay's old captain, Don Erickson, still resplendent in his uniform as he revisits the place he spent the better part of 30 years on the lakes and talks about what it was like in this very pilot house as he went searching for the Edmund Fitzgerald the night she was lost.
And then the sea was running 25, 30 feet, and so you had a pretty good sea. It was coming over the top of the pilot house, and it was nasty.
My mission is to preserve the history of Great Lakes navigation. It belongs to the steam and sail histories, the hydroplane histories, sailing on the lakes, small craft, the engine builders, inboard, outboard, giant engines, the divers who've been out there, a number of facets which are interesting because it ranges anywhere from finding a French cannon on the bottom of the Detroit River, which we did, up into going down and salvaging portions of vessels to preserve a bit of history.
As you may recall, last summer the museum's volunteer dive team recovered an old rum runner from the river. Efforts like this are all part of an ongoing quest to make the Dawson not only great fun for its visitors, but a wonderful way to learn about the nautical history that's played such a vital part in the development of our region. The Dawson offers a wide variety of exhibits and artifacts, from a 3D map of the lakes to cargo from a freighter that went down in the Great Storm of 1913. From the lighthouse lights at the pilot house entrance to that 18th century cannon also recovered from the Detroit River. Another of the artifacts you can walk right into is this remarkable room from the old city of Detroit, a 450-foot passenger liner that used to make an overnight run between Detroit and Buffalo. The ornate carving and stained glass are obviously from an era when how you got there was more important than how soon you got there. The large model of the city of Detroit was built by the artist William Moss as a high school project. Today, Bill is one of our most popular artists of historical and nautical subjects.
I like to pick subjects in the history of Detroit that are recent, that people can remember, that they can relate to. Like the foot of woodward we did showed the Verner's plant where people used to stop and get a Boston cooler. And then we did one of the Briggs Stadium as it looked about 1959, and a lot of people remember that before it was even converted over to Tiger Stadium.
A number of Bill Moss originals have hung in the Dawson, which, like its sister institutions, the Detroit Historical Museum on Woodward and historic Fort Wayne on the river, is part of the City of Detroit's historical department. And like the city in these tough economic times, the museums have suffered budget cuts.
We are open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 to 4, but we have limited staff due to cutbacks. So we're not really allowed to actually go out and do a lot of big projects unless we have some other financial backing.
And that's where the recovery of the Fitzgerald's anchor comes in. The Dawson is using it not only to gain an interesting new artifact, but as a fundraiser as well. And this print from a new Bill Moss painting of the Fitz is part of the deal.
He has a signed and number print of the Fitzgerald. He is going to be remarking every single one of those with a fleet flag of the Columbia Transportation Company and a likeness of the anchor and dating them July 20th. You also get your name on a brass plaque at the base of the anchor to say that you're going to be a link in the chain in helping to raise it. For a donation of $250, you'd be able to get that particular package.
Bill Moss's painting shows the Fitzgerald heading north under Port Huron's Blue Water Bridge with a kind of majestic sweep.
She's very high in the water. She's not carrying cargo, as opposed to other pictures you might have seen of her where she's loaded down and low in the water. They're just more impressive when they're very tall. So that's why I did it in that style.
In all, an appropriate view of the Fitzgerald in its glory days, and for all of us, a fitting way to lend a helping hand to one of Detroit's real gems, the Dawson Great Lakes Museum. And back live, the divers now out of the water. This is the moment. Look who's back. Our Mal Sillers out of his gear. Mal, everybody ready?
I think we're just about all set. The divers are out. We had to get everybody out, of course, before we could move the anchor.
12,000-pound anchor. You are going to see it raised coming up when we join you in just a couple moments. Stay with us. Live again from the middle of the Detroit River. Mal is still a little dripping wet.
Yeah, river rat.
All set to go, huh?
Yeah, we are. I should say we left a camera at the bottom pointed at the anchor, so we're going to try and get a shot of it. There it is.
There it is.
So we're going to try and get that anchor quickly up so it doesn't take the camera with it, and then we'll get you topside.
Let's signal
go.
now our
bring it up.
crane. Bring her up, guys. Here it comes.
There goes the crane. You can hear the noise.
Crane is beginning to come. Let's see if we can get a couple of good shots here of it coming up. We can see the cable in the river beginning to break the surface of the water.
Okay, we ought to see the anchor move in just a second now. It's probably going to sit up first.
There it is.
There goes the shackle.
This anchor weighs 12,000 pounds.
6 tons of steel.
You can see
keep it away from the camera.
Those are zebra mist. There it is. He's free. Look at the sediment. Our underwater robot camera is working.
Does it have the camera line with it?
38 feet is all it has to come now, as we will see it in just a couple of moments.
There it is, beginning
Here it
to break the
comes.
surface. There's the moments from now we
Here
will
comes
see
the
it.
ball.
I imagine we'll hear some boats honk their horns out here.
And now the anchor.
And there it is.
There's the shackle.
For the first time in 19 years, there is the 12,000-pound anchor from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Now, they're going to bring it and put it right about where it is. It's a beautiful anchor.
Oh, wow.
Boat horns signing. John Polisek, who you just met in our taped piece from the Dawson Museum, is with us live. John, this has to be an exciting time for you.
Something else, I'll tell you that.
Looks like it's still got the red paint on it.
It still has red paint on it. It's in pretty good condition, almost mint.
John, in a moment, hopefully we can go over and inspect that. But as people can see, it is encrusted with what would appear to be barnacles, but those are not barnacles, are they?
No, they're zebra mussels, the scourge of the lakes as it is. However, there's not a giant colony on them, but it's just one layer as it goes, so it's in pretty good condition.
Now the guys are moving some of our cables that are in the way of this anchor.
Would be nice. 12,000 pounds is a little bit heavy to go on a cord.
This stem of the anchor weighs about 1,000 pounds. Now we'll be able to get close to it as soon as they get that rested on the barge surface itself. Then there's no danger of this thing tipping over. As we can see, the dripping anchor, she's down.
I'm going to say, that's one of the things we brought up. It's going to be a giant memento to to marine history as it is here on the lakes.
Let's go take a look at it. Can we get a little closer to this? Come on, John
Come on
and Mel. Let's walk over and see this this baby. You hear the cheers from the folks on the Diamond Jack. Can we get a tight shot of this, Kevin? These are the zebra mussels. They are literally covering every single bit of this thing.
Just covered with it, the whole stock.
They'll be cleaned up tomorrow morning at the museum when we water blast them off.
These zebra mussels, John, they're not hard to get off, and this will.
No, we'll do water blasting on them tomorrow at the museum. It'll be taken to the museum, offloaded about 9 o'clock tomorrow, and then we're going to have it as a permanent exhibit at the museum. If people want to help the project, we have a special, what we call link in the chain offer. It's a special limited edition print by William Moss showing the Edmund Fitzgerald, a special remark. That can be ordered, and it also includes your name at the base of the anchor here in a brass plaque. That's a $250 donation to the museum. We have a special phone bank set up, so if you'd like to call area code 313-267-6655, we have people over at the museum. I think they're going to run that number a couple of times, and you can actually order this. We'll take a credit card, MasterCard, Visa. Hey, it's almost Discovery. Everything but American Express.
Well, we've got it up here. Of course, the reason we bring these artifacts up is because the mussels are just covering them down there, and it's important to get some of these artifacts up. So there you have it. We've got it up, and it's going to be moved and off to Dawson Museum.
Well, Mel, this has to be a very exciting and a very satisfying time for you, as you have.
Well, it's been a lot of fun.
This has been an exciting time just to touch this and to realize where this came from. Listen, that's it for now. We have had a terrific time.
Thanks very much.
Come see this at the Dawson Museum, and thanks for watching.
Hope you enjoy the adventure.
Congratulations, man.
With the load of iron ore, 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. A big ship and true was upon the picture when the gales of November gave her lay. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned, concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. And later that night when the ship's bell rang, it'd be the north wind they'd been feeling. The wind and the wild made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. And every man knew, as the captain did too, it was the witch of November come stealing. The dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait when the gales of November came slashing. supper time came, the old cook came on deck saying, fellas, it's too rough to feed you. At 7 p.m. a main hatchway gave in. He said, fellas, it's been good to know you. The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the big chef and